Today I'm sitting down with Ums to discuss a childhood favourite of his, Bicentennial Man, starring the wonderful Robin Williams. After a spoiler-free intro that you can watch if you haven't seen the movie yet, we'll dive into the unusual chronology of the film, its strengths and weaknesses, its profound themes of mortality and the human condition, and of course Robin Williams, firing on all cylinders. Beyond the performance, we'll also talk about how Bicentennial Man was a turning point in his career, although unfortunately, not for the better. But for now, sit back, relax, and welcome to my film club. First of all, Ums, welcome to Dom's Film Club. Hopefully your first of many appearances.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, we were flatmates for a few years with our friend Thurston, who hopefully will join us on this show one of these days. And when I told you about this podcast, I said, what's a movie that you would be interested in talking about? And we watched many fun movies over the years. But of all the films that you've seen that we watched together, you chose Bicentennial Man, which I hadn't even heard of, let alone seen. So before we get into anything beyond that, any of the details, why? Why was this the movie of the thousands of movies out there that came to your mind? And even you admitted that you hadn't seen it in a while, so I really want to start there.
There was something about Bicentennial Man, like when I first watched it, it was like I was very young, and it was one of those movies where like it sort of complemented the time of my life, if that makes sense. And something about the underlying sort of storyline of mortality and like human emotions and stuff, and I think that really impacted me a lot as a child when I watched it, and it just sort of always stuck in my head. The
obvious next question is, what age were you when you saw it for the first time? This movie came out in 1999, so you were...
I think it was released in Christmas 1999. I think maybe in the UK it was 2000. And it was funny because I actually spoke to my mum about this before coming on a podcast, and she actually remembered taking me and my sister. I was about seven years old, and it would have been like a birthday present. So it would have been like a happy day, a happy sort of time to.
And so you remember seeing it that first time and it making an immediate impact on you?
Yeah, I definitely remember like some iconic scenes, which we'll touch upon. Yeah. And then it was one of those, like I watched it and then like I didn't watch it for years. I think I vaguely remember watching it on TV like a few years later, and then ever since then until we spoke about this podcast, that I hadn't watched it since then. So it's one of those movies. It's just like been ingrained in the back of my memory, and it's for me it's quite a special movie.
That's a very good background, because this isn't a podcast for experts about dissecting angles and stuff, and we may with certain guests, but what I really want to get to the bottom of is movies exactly like this, that they might not be the best movies ever, but they made an impact on you as a normal person, and analyzing why, because I genuinely believe by hearing someone like you talk about this, it can make someone like myself. So I hadn't seen this movie until we talked about it. I watched it once pretty quickly afterwards, and I liked it a lot, and then was very surprised to see the bad reviews, and then I watched it again in preparation for this. But the fact is, if we'd never had this conversation, I would never have seen this movie. I'd never had this experience, and my hope is that by watching or listening to this podcast, someone can have that same experience, and especially hearing from you, both the experience you had as a kid, but then also rewatching it. And you talked about how it's got this family comedy aspect, but then also this really deep, like adult themes about mortality, and AI also is a very interesting aspect that's very modern. So that's a really good background story, because to be honest, I found both with myself and other people that I've spoken to already, even someone's favorite movies, especially when we were kids, it is hard to remember when we first saw them. But going to the cinema, that often helps a lot. Inglourious Basterds, one of my favorite movies. I remember the first time watching it. I don't remember anything about the experience, but I remember coming out of the cinema with my dad and my brother, because that, rather than just watching something on TV, that it really makes an impact. So we've seen when you first watched the movie. So how many times would you say you've watched it?
So like first as a child, and then probably like 4 or 5 times, up until now. Yeah.
So you said you were 7 or 8. How aware were you of Robin Williams at the time?
Yeah, I would say I was reasonably aware. I mean, like, our sort of generation, we sort of grew up with like Disney, and like obviously Aladdin was like Robin Williams is like
Aladdin, Mrs. Doubtfire, Flubber, even though it was critically panned. I remember watching that movie loads.
People our age, like Robin Williams, is definitely
top of mind.
Exactly.
We like to do kind of what we're doing now, an introduction with pre-spoilers, so where anyone can watch this and maybe decide to pause and go and watch the film. So how would you describe this movie in a couple of sentences, but without, like, I guess the premise of the movie, without spoiling it?
It's a movie which follows the story of a household appliance slash android called Andrew. This robot, he develops special human-like traits, and it just follows his sort of story and development over time.
I think it's fair to say over 200 years, because I will say this
Hence
might be
the
one of the
name.
most spoiler. This might be one of the most spoiler title ever.
Yeah.
Because you're never like, oh, is he going to die? It's like, no, we know that he's going to make it to 200.
Yeah.
Some of the facts and figures. It was released in 1999, and so it was actually based on a book, The Positronic Man, which was itself based on a novelette, which I learned is a fancy word for short story, by Isaac Asimov, who's considered one of the greatest science fiction writers of all time. It was part of a series of novels and short stories all about robots. When he talked about the 3 laws of robotics, I was like, wait, that sounds familiar, because I'd heard that in I, Robot with Will Smith, which is actually very loosely based on another book in that same series.
I was going to say it's sort of
this part of a very
Asimov.
vaguely extended universe. And apparently I was reading that Robin Williams, he was a huge sci-fi fan, and Asimov is one of his favorite writers. The film was a box office bomb. It cost almost $100 million to make. It's a big thing about the budget. It might not look it by today's standards, but it was very expensive to make. And it grossed 87 million. So, you need to more than double your budget to be profitable. So it was seen as a catastrophe. It was not critically praised. I like to ask people to guess. What do you think the Rotten Tomato scores were for review and audience? So and you can try and guess too.
I think from the critics' perspective, it's probably quite low. It's probably like a 35-40%.
37? So
okay, then
35 to 40, exactly 37.
I think,
and the audience?
Especially based on like my experience of the movie, I think like it's probably rated higher, maybe like a 60-55%.
50. That's
50.
That's
Okay,
a good guess.
Yeah.
And then interestingly, it had 6.9 on IMDb, which I'm more of a Rotten Tomatoes than IMDb, but that's a good, that's a decent score.
I mean, like when I always decide to like watch a movie, like my indicator on IMDb is like if it's like above like 6.5, that's normally like a relatively safe bet. It's gonna be like.
My sense is that people tend to use IMDb in perpetuity, whereas Rotten Tomatoes is much more in the moment, so it's much more heavily based on what people thought at the time. And I think over time, as we'll discuss, this movie is a lot more beloved. So I'm sure its IMDb score has increased over time. It did have an Oscar nomination. Can you guess what it was for?
Yeah, I did actually. Yeah, it was Best Makeup.
Best Makeup, yeah, which is, I was just watching a video because I'd read that he was in the suit, and you hear that and you don't really picture it, but I watched a behind the scenes video of him. They really built the suit on top of him, so that whole first half of the movie, he is really in there the whole time. So fair enough, I guess that's costume and makeup. So the final question before we hit the spoiler line is, who would you recommend this movie to? What sort of person and what sort of mood would someone have to be in for you to say, watch Bicentennial Man? In
terms of mood, I would say you have to be in quite like a relaxed, slightly melancholic sort of mood. I sort of picture it as like, it's definitely a weekend film, but like when you've had like a really upbeat, active like Friday, Saturday, and you need something on a Sunday just to like bring it down a bit and have a bit of like, tug on the emotion strings a little bit.
I love that. Agree 100%.
So it's definitely like a Sunday evening after like a big Sunday lunch. Maybe like, it's starting to get a bit dark outside and you want to like chill out.
Revisit your childhood a little bit, but also have a bit of a think. Have, as you say, the heartstrings pulled.
In terms of like the target audience, I always sort of struggle to like pinpoint it exactly. You could argue it's like a teenager, young person sort of movie, but also like a mature audience as well.
I disagree on the teenage. I think it would be like a young, so over not child. Like I don't think enough happens and it's not funny enough for it to be like for a 6-7 year old. But I think maybe 8 to 13, 14, it's got enough for it to be like a kids movie. I think teenage, I think it's kind of, it doesn't fall into that category. You either need to be very young or you need to be a bit older to, especially for a first watch.
Yeah,
I think it's very much. Right, I think it's very much even though I hadn't seen it time, very much a film of our generation. Like people like us, so millennials. For me, seeing Robin Williams in this role, I mean, this is the magic for me. Again, I keep saying it. Who hadn't seen it is discovering that there's this whole movie of Robin Williams just being so Robin Williams for 2 hours. It was like finding this thing that I didn't know existed, and that was like quite touching. So anyone out there like me who didn't know about it or hasn't seen it or has forgotten about it, I think just being able to see him in his element at a very interesting time of his career, it is just very touching. So I think you need to have that, for someone to watch it now. If you don't know who Robin Williams is, first of all, shame on you. That's not for you. But yeah, I think it definitely is like, it's a quintessential Robin Williams movie.
to some extent it's like almost like a hidden gem.
Yes,
because people always
exactly.
think of like Doubtfire,
Yeah.
and then there's but slightly more serious like Matt Damon,
Goodwill Hunting.
Goodwill
Yeah,
Hunting, yeah, and
yeah.
the more serious
Which,
ones.
well, we'll talk more about this in the actors, but this comes very soon after Goodwill Hunting, and I'm gonna argue I think this movie. I'm not saying this movie caused it, but it is really a turning point in his career. Kind of, he's hit his peak of Goodwill Hunting,
Yeah.
and honestly, it's kind of downhill from here. But more on that in the actor section. So. With that, we're going to hit the spoiler line. So up until now, we think that we've kept this quite surface level. Hopefully, we've given you enough information that you say, hey, I'm going to pause this. I'm going to go and I'm going to rewatch this because I haven't seen it in 20 years, or watch it for the first time and then come back to us afterwards to see our thoughts and see if you found the same thing. If you want to find out more, you can keep watching. But from now on, we will be discussing everything, complete spoiler. So you've been warned. So I like to start after the spoiler line with the entertainment value, because for me, this is the foundation of any movie. Everything after this can be mediocre or even crap. Like, there are movies that are just terrible, but they're entertaining. Maybe they're really funny. Maybe they're like, it's action, it's like explosions and everything, and it's great to just put on in the background. So what entertainment value, what types of feeling do you think this movie gives kind of at a basic level?
I'd say like in terms of like the first half of the movie, it's very much like there's quite a lot of like quips and like I didn't realize this at the time when I watched it as a child, but there's so much innuendos like I missed like the first time watching it. Yeah, all those like little funny sort of lines and innuendos and that magical Robin Williams like physical comedy aspect that's like so entertaining. Yeah, it's all like subtle bits, I think.
So you're saying to start off, it's a funny movie.
Yeah, it's a funny
especially
movie.
The first half.
And then over time, it gradually turns into this romantic, slight drama aspect to it, which sort of shifts style.
Yeah, we talk about the story. I've come up with a thesis that this movie can be broken down into like 5 episodes, and each one of them is kind of a different genre. But yeah, it makes you laugh. It's moving. It makes you think. From quite early from the start, you start thinking about his position in society, but obviously, especially at the end, where it basically almost becomes like, you know, a high-end drama about, like, you know, as you say, mortality and what makes a human and everything.
It gets quite deep.
It gets very deep. That's where I can imagine a child the last half hour being like, what? Well, the last 15 minutes being like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
So yeah, it brings you in with the laugh, the family comedy. But yeah, it's a thinker, and I'll be honest, like I even the second time I cry at the end, and so for me, I believe the power of cinema is being able to give you these emotions. So whether it is just cheering you up because you're laughing so much, or crying because you're so moved, or terrified because you're so afraid, and whatever else you think, what you really want is getting these emotions, and this movie takes
That's the thing. I mean, like, when I watch movies, I don't particularly get very, like, emotional, but, like, there's just something about Bicentennial Man where, you know, it really gets me. And not necessarily to tears, but, like, there's certain scenes, so I guess we'll touch upon.
Yeah, and obviously for you, there's like,
highs and lows.
There's nothing can replicate the nostalgia of having seen a movie like you did, like, so long ago, and obviously then the Robin Williams magic, because I don't have that history, but I have it with him. So when seeing him get emotional gets me emotional. So the story, first thing is, and this was quite interesting for me the first time I watched this, it can be criticized, but I think it's something that makes this movie stand out. It does not in any way follow a normal movie structure. Now, I'm sure there's a nerd out there that can break it down and be like, no, this is the first and this is the second, this is the third act. Sure, but for a normal person watching it, it really does feel like different episodes. And part of that, in my research, obviously we said it's based on the book, which is based on the short story. And even though they take some liberties, in terms of the story, they follow it quite closely. And obviously books are structured different from movies, so I do feel like it's one of those where maybe it feels a bit weird, and it is because it is based on other material, and they are trying to stay by it, so they don't break it to fit into the 3-act mold. And it is a bit weird, but it's an interesting ride, because it's the first time you're like, you don't know where you're going with the story.
Yeah, I mean a big part of the story as well is like the big chronological jumps, which I think that it's hardest to do that with like the typical, like, 3-piece sort of mold. So
absolutely.
That definitely, like, not complicated, but definitely sort of makes it a bit sort of different.
Yeah, I don't think it complicates in the sense that it confuses, but I spent way longer than I should have last night building a spreadsheet trying to figure out the chronology and how old people are and whether it makes sense. Some people say it doesn't make sense, but they don't say how old Portia is at the end, but I've figured out how old she is.
There's definitely some bits of like the chronology. I think if we discuss like certain, it's not, I wouldn't say we're like plot holes, but there's certain things I would mention later on.
I don't think it's a plot hole because they fix it by her making an offhand comment about saying, oh, you've given me this elixir and you've changed. And obviously all of his discoveries have helped her live an extremely long time. And to me, that's the thing about, as long as the scriptwriter is addressing, like, listen, we know this doesn't make sense, and you get one throwaway line which says this is why, I'm like, that's fine. It takes place over a really long period of time, but also we only actually, because he's a bicentennial man, but most of the movie is only taking place in his first 60 or 70 years. I think literally over 100 years of his life takes place in the last few minutes of the movie. But yeah, the thing about the story, and I'm curious whether you remember feeling this or rewatching it maybe, that you start off the first time they go revisit the robotics company, and there's the whole thing about how they don't like the fact that he has consciousness and stuff. And I'm like, okay, so this is going to be like your cliche movie where the dad is going to protect him, and then the evil company is going to come. I wasn't thinking about the title at this point. They're going to try and capture him, because there have been a lot of movies with whether it's robots or whatever, where there's just an evil company or the government who are trying, and they're going to take you, and they're going to try and take his mind and wipe him. And then it just jumps forward 20 years, and it's like, okay, we're not, like, the company doesn't even exist anymore. So that was like, okay, this is going to be something different.
I think that's the thing, like, the first time I rewatched the movie, what's the company? It's like Northrad or like...
Yeah.
There's pretty much like two main scenes where the first time is where Sir and Andrew go to the boss.
Yes.
And they say, Andrew's displaying all this, like...
and they're like, we can reprogram him.
Yeah, and then the second one is like, when he gets injured and they go to repair him, like... The first time I rewatched it, I thought those were like, for some reason I thought it was quite clunky in terms of like as a overall addition to storyline, but like having rewatched it a few times, I think it works relatively well to like condition the rest of the movie.
It does. I think it's good because there's actually, you spend most of the movie inside the family, and then this is like, no, this is what the rest of the world thinks about, because especially given this movie is old, we have all these conceptions now and ideas about robots and AI and stuff, but it's important for the movie. And so these are based on books which were written in the 70s, so way before the movie was made. The way the world saw robots back then in the books and in the movies is very different to how we do. So it's important to be like, no, this was not seen as a good thing.
He refers to the Andrew as it, and like it obviously has like a malfunction. It's like, it's that conditioning to like set that universe, how people in that universe sort of perceived robots. And
there's a lot of themes in this, like we talked about mortality, but slavery, even though it's never explicitly talked about, is a part of it. They talk about freedom, but obviously the insinuation when you're not free is that you are like a slave, and obviously a big part of that was being seen as property as opposed to a human being. So here are my 5 episodes that I broke it down, and they actually quite succinct. So the first 23 minutes, and there's another 13 minutes, the beginning and then becoming part of the family. So the beginning is just the introduction, here's the robot, this is what he does, and then it's when they realize that he has the emotions and he becomes more than just a servant. So that kind of becomes the first of 30-40 minutes, and that's just very, there's a kid becoming attached to the robot, she teaches him to become human. That's just your classic family comedy, and that's where you think, okay, and there's going to be the evil corporation, and this is the movie. But then him falling in love with, basically having feelings for the grown-up little miss, then it kind of becomes a bit of a rom-com. The whole him loving her, and she obviously has confusing feelings about him, and will she marry the other guy?
I love that scene where little miss goes to a basement and she's like, she's talking about her fiance proposing to her, but she's not sure, and she's like, but what if there's this like other guy, and like I don't know, like if like Andrew sort of understands like she's talking about him, but like I think that's like a really good scene in terms of like the first bit of like romantic sort of.
And it's a bit weird because you think, okay, we've changed gears, now it's going to be their love story, and then she gets married and we just jump forward again, and you're like, well, that was a bit strange. So then we have what I call the adventure section. So it starts off with the scene on the beach, which is 12 years later, where Andrew is with little miss and her children, Andrew and the other little girl, and then it starts talking about the freedom. He gets the freedom, the dad sort of exiles him, the dad dies, he goes off looking...
That's the scene which like really gets me when the dad dies. Not necessarily, I don't know, it's just like because he treats him so well, and he's very like considerate, and he's like an actual father figure to him, and he like teaches him all about humanity. And then when that scene, like that's one which like really gets to me. Like I think it's just like really nice.
There's a lot of analysis about the themes of the relationship between Sir and Andrew. A Pinocchio type story, obviously with Geppetto making him into a real boy. There's a lot of parallels to that story. And then there's also a Greek tale of a sculptor falling in love with his sculpture, which is called Galatea, which is the name of the robot that the inventor has later on. So that's a direct reference to that Greek myth. It's really, I mean, obviously it's sad that he's dying, but it's also sad that the last 20 years of his life, he didn't have any relationships basically with Andrew, because he'd said he didn't want to see him after he gave him the freedom.
That's a thing which also like I think adds to emotion. You know, that scene where Andrew asks for his freedom, like he's obviously really pissed, but like he sort of realizes that the right thing to do is to grant him his freedom, and not necessarily grant him, but like to let him go his own way.
He grants it. He doesn't take any money, but then the definition of doing something begrudgingly.
And I think that is quite like an underrated scene, one where Sir's talking to little Miss, and she's like, Sir says to Little Miss, you know, it was you who put this idea in his head, and she's like, no, it's actually you. You know, you fed him all these books and stories, and it's not like a Hollywood blockbuster line, but like she says to him, like, you know, you fed him all these books, and it's because of you and Andrew's abilities that he's as ever bit as complex as we are. And I think that's like a really, really nice line. It's not super emotional, but like I think it's like a nice like transition into his like freedom part of the story.
100%. And I do think that when he starts talking about freedom, that is the first time it's like, no, this actually is going to be a serious movie, because up until then it is all a bit like silly. At this point it's like she's married with kids. There's no more even like that scene on the beach where when he starts talking about the freedom, there's no more like flirting or romance or anything. We're past that, and he's like, now let's start talking about grown-up stuff. I want my freedom. So he gets the freedom very quickly. Time goes by fairly quickly in the film. The Sir dies, and at that point he decides to go off and find the other robots. Again, this bit, it feels a bit shoehorned in. It doesn't serve a huge purpose of him going out and finding these other robots. Like they could have done it with a couple of lines of just that there are no other robots, but this is clearly an important part of the book, so they were like, we need to show this.
From a like screenplay perspective, it's quite like a basic concept. I think it works well with visual sort of, you know, him like walking through a desert and like wiping the snow across like the snowmobile with like the robots which is inactive. And it's obviously more of like a section of a movie to help tie into the next big bit, which is him meeting Rupert Burns.
Yes. I think, that's it. Narratively, it could have been a lot shorter. But from an entertainment point of view, it's good. It's interesting.
It's one of those scenes I remember.
Exactly. It's a fun scene. And even though this movie has a weird structure and stuff, I think it's fairly well paced. You're never like, oh my God, I can't believe this bit keeps going on, except actually for one that will come, I think is a bit too long. But it keeps moving. You're never like stuck in a bit.
No.
So gets back, meets Rupert, the inventor, who's now going to be helping him with upgrading his body.
What do you think about the scene where he first sees Galatea? That's like another one of those scenes I remember as a child. I think it's
dancing.
It's quite fun because the whole movie's soundtrack is all like very like, you know, soft, very typical movie soundtrack, very floaty and stuff like that. But like when it gets to seeing Galatea and she slaps her hip, and it's like, you know, Respect by Aretha Franklin. Like it's quite fun seeing like basic but fun.
I can definitely see how watching it as a kid, that's something that was funny, and then as an adult, you were like, you remember. I found it a bit weird, and I do find the robot really annoying.
She's weird, like
she's weird and annoying, but so I don't love that, but like I'm okay with it. It's a part of it. In a way, it kind of makes you like Andrew even more, because like he's so much more pleasant than her.
Yeah.
And so then he gets his face, and then goes back and he meets Portia. And so this enters the fourth episode, I call it, which lasts 35 minutes. I see this as the main rom-com. And this is such like, oh, they don't like each other, and then gradually they grow closer and then they fall in love. And I kind of feel like that flirtation bit with Little Miss, obviously it's the same actress as well, was sort of the precursor to this. Obviously then they got on, whereas here they start off from a point of not liking each other. Not for any good reason other than the fact that they just have like both strong personalities.
Yeah, and I think also like this is the part of a movie where you have to be a bit more like a little bit more tuned in. Like we've had all that like light-hearted comedy, and now it's starting to get to that like romantic sort of the script gets a bit slightly more deeper and more like serious in nature.
Yeah, and I think that might be the problem. So we'll talk about it when we talk about the script, but this is where the script really becomes a problem, because up until this point, so much has been happening on the story and the fact, weirdly, the fact that he's in the robot suit almost helps take away from what he's saying. And obviously it's Robin Williams, so he's delivering it at like 100%. But when it becomes this, basically for 35 minutes, so from the point of him meeting her to the point where they finally sleep together, because they literally sleep together, and then the next scene is her basically saying, we'll never be accepted, how can we get married? And then it's the last 15 minutes of the movie, the drama, which I call the quest for humanity, and that's the movie. And that last 15 minutes is very serious. It's like philosophical, it's sad, but those 35 minutes are like just pure rom-com. And so you could argue it doesn't really know what it is, or it does, and it just basically, I prefer a movie that does it in sections rather than movies that mix it all together. Like, it would just be really weird if one scene is them falling in love and then him having sort of an existential crisis and then him conquering her. I do like that they break it down into separate sections.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, from an artistic perspective, it can like wear thin a bit if it's like that in and out weaving sort of a genre. Definitely.
One thing on the romance is that, so in the book there is a romance story, but it's not nearly as front of stage as in the film, which is obviously a very typical Hollywood thing to do in the 90s. I would say I do wish his whole quest for humanity wasn't tied to the romance, because that's it. In the book, he very much wants to be recognized as human for himself, whereas in the movie, they're very much like he's doing it for her. He wants to be recognized as a human so that their union can be seen as respected and stuff. I think by the end, he really just wants to be accepted as a human, but I wish he wasn't like doing it, out of love. And just more for like.
But I think from like a Hollywood movie perspective, it sort of has to have that like the love interest, definitely.
So moving on to the actors / characters. Obviously, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about. I mean, the core of this episode is going to be talking about Robin Williams, but I figured before we do that, and we'll just focus, let's just hit a couple of the other characters. So we talked about him already. Sam Neill as the dad. I think he's like a really strong foundation.
I think that's a really good cast. Casting, like, besides Robin Williams, he's definitely like my second favorite sort of character in film.
I think Oliver Platt as Rupert, I think he's really good too.
I think he works well. I think that sort of role, you got quite a few options, I think, in terms of people you could actually cast instead, but I think he works well in it, and he's like that sort of slightly awkward scientist. He's
supposed to bring the comic relief, but then the robot is used as the super comic relief, and obviously she's annoying, and I think he's that good in between. He is funny, but he's also very useful for the plot, and he is like a compassionate human, but he has some pretty good one-liners about stuff. So and he's just a charming actor. Then what do we think about Embeth Davidtz, the known for playing Little Miss and Portia?
As an actress, I like her. Her role is not imposing leading lady role, but I think it works relatively well.
The duality of her playing both roles, do you think she did a good enough job at playing them different, or because I was fine with her doing the two role thing.
Yeah, I was generally fine with it. You have that really funny, sort of slightly goofy scene where it's later on where it's
both
Little Miss and Portia, and it's is this a skit or that's a bit goofy, but
it's silly, but I think at that point of the film, it's still actually, it does come after a really long serious bit with him looking for the other robot. So I guess it's just a bit of comic relief. My opinion on her, kind of in line with what you're saying, I think she's fine, but she's not great. In the hands of a different actress, an A-lister, the role could have been more, and as you say, it could have been a more imposing role and stuff. But she very much sort of is I know that I'm playing second fiddle to Robin Williams.
Yeah, I think that's always.
Okay. To me, she ticks the boxes, but she's not amazing or anything. So the things that she's known for, the biggest thing is Matilda.
Yeah.
She plays the teacher in that. She was also in Schindler's List and Bridget Jones' Diary. She's a solid supporting actress, and the fact is she's never been a starring. She never was, and she never became a starring lady.
The sort of actress who always plays that empathetic, sort of very supportive character.
It's fine, and we'll talk about this in the recasting, about whether, if you were to recast it, whether you would put someone who's similar, nowadays modern person who is a second fiddle, or if you could put someone that is more front and center, more starring lady material, and whether that would change it. But anyway, that brings us to Robin Williams, the heart and soul of the movie.
The man,
the legend, and rest in peace. Yeah, I think we said in the beginning, this is such a great, in terms of the movie, it's such, and the material, this is such a great Robin Williams movie.
Oh, yeah.
Because it just allows him to do so much.
On IMDb, there's like one of the factors, like they had like a big list of names of actors they considered, and like I was looking through them, and it's like,
it's
no,
crazy.
even like we had big names like, oh, Robert De Niro and Tim Allen and Jeff Bridges. Literally can't imagine any of them be able to do like with funny quips, but like physical comedy. It is like a definitely one of a kind type.
That was one of my biggest shocks in the research, was finding out that they did consider so many people, because this feels like it was, obviously the material existed, but this feels like it was built around him.
Such a difficult role to fulfill as like a,
I think in the list, there was Tom Hanks and Tim Allen, which I don't in any way think it would have been a better movie, but I'm like, it would be a different movie, but I could see it. But then,
I mean, like if you had to choose, like if Robin Williams said no and they still wanted to make it, like I guess Tom Hanks would be like probably the logical big name. You could probably do that like some comedic sort of with comedic factor aspect to it, but yeah, Robin Williams is just irreplaceable. Really.
Yeah, there are actors who are funny, and there are actors who are very good dramatic actors, and he just has that perfect blend. I can't think of anyone who is so good in both things. Like, you think of like all the great actors, someone like Tom Hanks, obviously like one of the best actors of his generation, and he's funny in Forrest Gump, but like, you know, he's never done stand-up comedy. He's not like Robin Williams started off as a stand-up comedian. He is a comedian in his blood. He's a comedian who happens to be a really, really good actor.
And like I was thinking about this the other day, like in terms of like other comedy actors, Jim Carrey like do that like super hyperactive, really funny sort of crazy guy, but like I don't think he could do as well in terms of like the sort of the romantic drama type sort of work that Robin Williams can do.
Jim Carrey can tone down the goofiness, let's call it, when he has his serious moments, but he can never turn it off. Whereas Robin Williams can go full, he can go 100% serious, and obviously because he has a bunch of serious movies, obviously Good Will Hunting. I watched last night a 1 hour photo, which is where he plays like a psycho.
I remember watching Insomnia,
that's
many years ago. That's that's really creepy as well.
That was the first serious movie of his I watched, like back at the time it came out, and I remember being a bit traumatized by that. I was like, I don't like it.
I mean, but undoubtedly, like comedy is his domain.
Yeah, but and so this movie where you need to be funny, like it's because this movie is silly. It's like the robot part is like the first half. It is silly. You need to not take yourself too seriously. You need to be entertaining. You need to be silly. You need to make, because the script in the first half, I think it gets by because at the end of the day, he is a robot, so he is speaking robotically, and the fact that Robin Williams can take all of that and make it funny, like the fact that he can tell jokes in a monotone way and make them funny.
Oh man, the breakfast scene where he's like, "Can I tell you some jokes?"
Yeah, apparently
like,
he made all those up.
Yeah,
he ad-libbed them.
Yeah,
which is not entirely surprising.
Definitely, as a child, like the last joke about like a patient walks into a doctor's and the doctor said, "Oh, can I numb your breast?" And she goes, "Oh yeah, sure, num 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 num." As like a 7-year-old, I would have definitely flown over my head. Like, those like those scenes were like they're just. It's that like little bit of like stardust to a character, which many other actors couldn't really.
Yeah, and then I'm sure there are funny actors that could do all of this in the first half, but then you wouldn't take them seriously when it got serious. And especially the end, that 15 minutes of him like finding his humanity and.
Can I say also? I mean, like we sort of touched upon like how it was nominated for like a makeup. Oscar nominee. Robin Williams was about 48 at the time.
Yeah,
he looks like really good for 48.
I thought that. I think he's
like for a guy who like he had like cocaine addictions and like drug addictions, but like for 48 at the time, like he looks like super young, like really nice complexion, and like I especially the scene where he carries his head on that's like he looks so like
he looks like that should be the picture that he's remembered at, because I think when you see him younger, you're a younger version of Robin Williams, but you sort of need to grow into yourself.
I also like how they sort of like an inside joke at the time, when he's molding his face, he's like, "Oh, so what age do you want to be?" He's like, I'm actually like
62. I think
how about we say like 42? And it's actually like 5 years less than he is in real life. It's like that sort of like fun, sort of meta sort of joke in it.
When you saw it as a kid, you'd obviously seen him in the other stuff, but I guess you weren't really aware of like the trajectory of his career. But the fact is, he was 2 years off Good Will Hunting, where he had finally won his Oscar after being nominated 3 times for Good Morning Vietnam, Dead Poet Society, and The Fisher King. So I think you can argue that 97, so Good Will Hunting, is the high point of his career. That he's the funny man. He's had critical success. He's had box office success. And then he's sort of like he's not, you can tell when you look at his IMDb that he's not really sure what to do. And a movie like this, which combines the humor but also the drama, that's kind of the sweet spot that he was trying to kind of fit in. But this is one of the few movies where I think it actually combines those two. And if you just look at the rest of his IMDb, it's one or the other. He either takes these really dramatic roles like 1 Hour Photo, which is a good movie, but it's not fun and it's not remembered. It's just a very serious, dark role of him as like, it's almost like he has to be either the lovable funny man or he needs to be a psycho, like in Insomnia.
Yeah, and I think from like children, sort of young teen audience, I mean, like after like 2002 and onwards, like the only sort of really fun child movie I could think of was like Night at the Museum. Like he plays Theodore Roosevelt. I think that was his last like. The movie was okay, but like his role in it was quite good, I thought. But
it was fine. Like those aren't good movies.
No,
they're fine for kids. They're a good way for the next generation to discover him, and I think they serve that purpose. But I did some stat crunching here.
Oh, nice,
I looked at his entire filmography on Rotten Tomatoes, and for his career, 34% of his movies were fresh, which I can't tell you what it is for other actors, but to me that's not a great score. Obviously, fresh is a high bar. Like it needs to be 60 or more, but only 34 of his movies were. But before Bicentennial Man, we're not counting Bicentennial Man here. Before, his score was 46. So 46% of his movies before Bicentennial Man were fresh. And after Bicentennial Man, it's only 22%. Mm-hmm. So the only movies after Bicentennial Man, so between 1999 and 2014 when he passed away, the only fresh ones were Insomnia, 1 Hour Photo, and The World's Greatest Dad. Insomnia and 1 Hour Photo are these dark dramas where he plays like a serial killer, not serial killer, but like a psycho. And World's Greatest Dad I haven't seen, but I believe it's got a serious thing. It's about his sons died in it, but I do think it's got more of a comedy thing. But apart from that, it is just... It's either small roles. He did a bunch of voice stuff, like he was in the Robots,
like Happy Feet,
which
I think that was relatively successful, isn't it? Yeah.
So I just think the Bicentennial Man is very interesting because it combines the drama and the comedy very well. And then after that, he sort of went one extreme or the other. So either very dramatic, which some success but not all, and then he just apparently he also then started running out of money because he was at the top of his game. He was twice divorced. He owed a lot of money in alimony. He's admitted that he started doing movies just for the money.
So what was Robin Williams' last big like box office hit in terms of like something which was considered like a success and not necessarily a flop? Like
I also didn't take into account movies where he wasn't like the main star or whatever. But honestly, like
as like the main focus,
Insomnia or 1 Hour Photo.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So it's pretty soon after Bicentennial.
That's it. And then he lived on for 15 years after this, and it was very much like circling the drain, and
sad.
It's very sad. So all of this, I think this context is important because coming on the back of Good Will Hunting and being one of the most famous people in the world, there was a lot of expectation for him, and I think that's one of the reasons why the movie did not do well critically, because at the time this wasn't seen as a great... It's not a great movie, and it wasn't seen as a great performance because he was actually nominated for a Razzie Award. He lost to Adam Sandler in Big Daddy, but which is actually super interesting because look at Adam Sandler now. Adam Sandler's on top of the world. He's one of the richest comedians. He's churning out
Uncut Gems. Like, oh my god, that's such a good film.
And he still makes crappy movies, but he's got a contract with Netflix, and it just makes you think. Obviously, Robin Williams was older. If he hadn't had his health problems and his very tragic passing, like maybe he would have had a resurgence in his career because that's the thing, he never found his niche. Like, and I'm not saying Bicentennial Man was it, but he never just found his type of movie that then he could keep making. Whereas that's the thing, Adam Sandler, he knows he can make his murder mystery movies, which are not good, but they do gangbuster numbers on Netflix. He can make his Uncut Gems or his, I didn't love it, but Spaceman movie that came out recently, like dramatic roles. Actually, Adam Sandler's quite an interesting parallel to Robin Williams because he's actually a good dramatic actor and he's obviously funny as like a silly man as well.
I mean, like Happy Gilmore is like one of those like really fun, goofy.
Yeah, just,
Like,
it's a different lane as Robin Williams,
Yeah.
but it is similar to like some of the goofiness he did. But so I think that because he was in this confusing time of his career, the critics were like, nope, this isn't it, kind of try something else.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't seen as a good performance then. And I can see, like, if I was a 25-year-old cinephile who had grown up with Robin Williams back then, obviously I wasn't, I was a child, but I can see how you watch this and be like, like just seeing it once and being like, nope, this isn't it, we expect more.
I think that's the thing, like, because Bicentennial Man has like such a special sort of part of my like movie life, I sort of get a bit sad like reading like the sort of the stories around the production. Like to me, I have like some of my own theories within the movie as to why it wasn't as popular as it is, but like I think one of the main factors was his relationship with Disney and how Disney handled like the marketing, and like I think they cut the budget a bit or wanted to cut the budget a bit, and then
they didn't market it aggressively
enough.
enough.
And also like did they market it more as like a comedy, where in fact like we discussed it's like a comedy drama rom-com.
I mean, to be fair, it would be a really hard movie to market because it has so many different sides, and that is the difference between seeing a movie when it comes out and marketing it, and going back and watching it. And I do think, as we've said, you've used the term, and I agree. I think it is a hidden gem, and it is a real treat for someone who hasn't seen this movie to be able to go back and watch this movie and be like, yeah, it wasn't his best movie, but this is a really fun, interesting Robin Williams performance. So moving on, we talked about the best thing about the movie is Robin Williams. Let's talk about the weakest thing about the movie, the dialogue and the script.
Yeah.
So this is the biggest criticism, whether it's the overview or individual reviews at the time.
Yeah.
And I'd just say it's mediocre writing. And Robin Williams does everything he can with it, and then just sometimes it like he can't do enough.
There's no like standout lines. There's like quotable lines, like the main one is like, one is glad to be of service, and I like how they use like that phrase like quite well during the story. Like the first time he goes to like I don't know what they call it, like the UN Council, and they knock him down and they make him feel like a robot, and he sort of reverts to one is glad to be of service. That's like quite gut wrenching moment. But as we mentioned about the plot, like for me, I sort of zone out a bit when it gets to like when he sparks up the relationship with Portia.
Yeah,
I think some of that sort of romantic gets a bit wishy-washy.
And I think that's where the weakness of the script really comes out. Because let's be honest, rom-coms is very much two people in a room having conversations. So there's no more robot suit. There's no more like, dying father or like philosophical questions.
Yeah.
There's no more child for this, and he's not ad-libbing things. So it's very much two people.
Yeah.
And at this point, they're both human as well. So it is two humans saying the lines in the script. And there's only so much an actor can do with that if those lines aren't great.
For me, like, every movie doesn't have to have like super thought-provoking or like pithy lines, but like with Bicentennial Man, it does sort of sag a bit, if that makes sense.
It's a weakness, but far few movies are perfect, and I think it's one of those. A lot of the times, I think with a movie that you like overall, the weak points, they can maybe annoy you a bit the first time, maybe you become aware of it after seeing it the first time and they annoy you the second time, but sort of then you kind of go in with it as a known entity and you're like, yeah, we know that the lines aren't the best here, and you can just enjoy everything else about it. The production, so this is, I'd say it's better than the dialogue. It's not as good as Robin Williams in it, but it is an interesting movie to look at. It's very unique on the style. Yeah. And I mean, the big thing, I guess, would be the robot costumes in the set and the way it looks. Yeah. How do you feel about that?
I like the aesthetic, and like watching it now, like it's almost a 25-year-old movie, and I think it still looks quite fresh. Like the robot suits, I think they did a good job with. It's sort of, I think especially in robotics, like humans like things which seem relatively like similar to us, and like
but not too human.
Familiar.
Yeah, familiar.
And I think like, the opening scene where Andrew's revealed, for me, it's like a really iconic scene. The robot suit aged relatively well. They didn't try to go like futuristic, but they sort of kept it like quite.
And apparently they very much tried to stay faithful to like the vision of the books and the whole Asimov universe, and that is how he described robots.
There's a bit where he first charges and have all light, so that's a bit like a bit silly, like all the like red and blue lights when he's charging. That's a bit.
But they could have chosen to make him more humanoid as a robot at the beginning, but they obviously chose to make him more like a Tin Man. I mean, the scene where they put Robin Williams' face on, that shows like that's the special effects there are really good.
Yeah.
And which actually, by the way, we haven't said that scene, which is just about in the middle of the movie. So he spends half the movie in the suit, but that bit, as someone watching this years after he died, that first time you see his face, it just like actual chills when you see him open his eyes and stuff.
I guess from like, I'm not a special effects expert. From a special effects standpoint, that's probably quite a relatively basic scene to shoot in terms of like the complexity to have his face superimposed on the.
I feel like nowadays it would. I'm sure Mr. Beast.
I think
could
it's
do it
done
on
really.
YouTube, but back then I'm sure
it was really
quite
smoothly
complicated.
done. I mean, I watched. It's slightly different, but like I watched Green Book recently, and the actor's face is like superimposed on the guy playing piano, and that was 2017, and you can like tell it doesn't really work well with that scene where he's like being carried and he like drops him, like it's really smooth and it's well done. The scene where he's like molding his face, I think you can tell it's quite simple to do, but like it works well.
Yeah, I think it all works. And I think one interesting is someone today watching this was like, oh, this like looks old. And again, it's not that this is the best that we could make a robot look back then, but it was an artistic choice to make him look this unique way.
And also his body shape really suits the
I mean, that's probably they needed him to actually Robin Williams' body to actually fit in the suit.
Yeah, we mentioned earlier about the list of like other actors. Like I couldn't imagine like a Jeff Bridges who's like quite a big guy, or like someone else. Talking of like production, you mentioned like sets, that house man. There's just something about it. Something like it's just really classy in the garden. That's a great scene as well. The garden scene where talking about special effects, where he projects Sir's wedding dance. It's super basic like special effects, but like it's super effective because he's like it's projected on top of the water, and it's like very emotional scene. Another scene I remember as a child, like it's really nice, touching scene.
The other thing with the future, which I find funny, is seeing movies from the past projecting the future.
Yeah,
because the movie came out in 99, but the movie starts in 2005.
Yeah,
so they're in 2005 we're gonna start. I don't think they have flying cars at the beginning, but by like
towards the end they do.
Or in the 2040s or whatever, they have like there's a shot of San Francisco and there's just cars flying everywhere. But at the same time, when he goes to ask Sir for his freedom, he's on a tablet.
Yeah, the
and
PDAs, it's like
a super bulky tablet. So I just find it really funny that they're like, no, we're gonna have flying cars, but we're not gonna have skinny tablets.
The other scene I love in terms of like how goofy is the futuristic universe is the first time he sees Galatea and like the market stall. Like you can just tell they were like, okay, we'll get some like uni students to like make some like basic designs, like, hey, just put some like fish wire netting on top of your head and like put some like shiny like t-shirts and like, yeah, you're good to go.
You mean for the fashion?
Yeah. I think in terms of like the main characters and the family, they did a good job in terms of like keeping it relatively classic in terms of like the uniforms. And I think the director, he was quoted as saying in terms of like the set and the style, like because it's mainly based in San Francisco, he was saying like San Francisco is very much a city which like keeps to its past,
right?
And I think that's the good thing about his movie is they didn't. I mean, obviously we had like flying cars and stuff, but they still had like the classic architecture. The family house is very much like a very classic early 20th century house.
The ball scene where they get together and the wedding. I think the ball scene was where they finally get together. That she had like a work event thing. That was at the San Francisco City Hall, which apparently had just been refurbished.
Yeah,
read about this. And then they flooded it, like setting off the sprinklers.
And the mayor was pissed. Like, I can imagine. I mean, they were charging him like, I was reading, is like up to $20,000 a day. But yeah, in terms of like the overall set production, I think it's quite well done. Some of the like transitional scenes of the futuristic cities, like the first one, you can tell it's like backgrounds like a painting and then maybe like overlaid with like green screen. It's a bit sloppy, but
yeah, I think they do a good job at you always remember that you're in the future, but you're like it's literally in the background because that's not what's important. What's important is his journey.
And I was also thinking on the way here, it's not really a gripe, but like especially when they jump like 80 years into the future and they have like scenes in public, you don't see any other like robots or like any other. It's just like with flying cars. I guess from like a budgetary standpoint, it makes sense not to like.
Yeah, but
have too
also
many
we know
robots.
that by the end, the other robots look like humans because the nurse is
Yeah.
unplugs
Oh,
them is a
yeah,
human.
that's true,
Well, that
yeah.
is Galilea.
That would be a good excuse from a director not to.
Yeah, it just depending. So speaking of director, we haven't said his name yet. So it was Chris Columbus,
Columbus,
who made
Mrs.
Home Alone and Mrs. Doubtfire, and he'd also worked on 9 Months with Robin Williams. So yeah, he obviously comes from the kids side of movies with Home Alone and Mrs. Doubtfire and stuff, but also wanted to work with Robin Williams, wanted to make something a bit more serious. So yeah, I think decent job by him. You know, he didn't write the script, he just directed it, but it's not like it's a super great feat of directing.
It was
either.
his like first sci-fi
was it?
endeavor as well. I think that's like in his interview, he was like, "Oh, it's quite a challenge, you know."
Well, yeah,
Quite
I'm sure. Yeah, the logistics on set.
Yeah.
I saw some behind the scenes when you consider, you know, the special effects about. So, for example, in the flying cars and then the suit and everything, and then all the aging, and then you got those scenes with like Portia and Little Miss. So yeah, I'm sure it was logistically complicated. So good job on him. So we've hit all of the like main details things. So I like to kind of wrap up the serious part with what is it at the end of the day like that this movie makes you feel that is just so special.
There's a word when Andrew gets his blood transfusion and he's like, so how long do I have to live? And he's like, oh, you know, you might have 20 years, you might have 30 years. You know, do you eat healthy? Do you eat bad? And he's like, you know, he's a bit confused. And Rupert Burns just, you know, when he unplugs the machine, he goes, welcome to the human condition. It's such a great story about the human condition and like how, you know, complex humans are and like all the emotions, which starting off with showing emotions and then like initiative, love, empathy, fear. And it's just one of those movies where it does a good job like going through those like stages of like mortality and like,
yeah, it starts with nice stuff, soft, silly stuff, but yeah, it really builds to the biggest questions.
I think that's definitely why it's like Bicentennial Man is one of those movies. It just, because I watched it as a young child, and at that age you're sort of starting to understand a bit more about mortality, you know, all the sort of human aspects of, you know, emotions.
And I think it gets it right.
It's really hard to explain. I don't know. It's like
no, I think you've done a good job.
But that human condition is like, it always sticks in my head, like that sort of.
When I remember as around that age when you do become aware of mortality and stuff, and I used to watch the TV show Highlander, so where they were all immortal.
Okay.
And at the time I was like, yeah, you want this, you want to be live forever. But as you get older, and part of it is because of movie and books and stuff, but you realize that actually, and then you see these movies. This is what I love about art, whether it's movies or books, where they'll have people like Age of Adeline. It's not a great movie, but it's interesting. It's about Blake Lively as this woman who lives forever, and even in Highlander and stuff, they address the fact that like living forever means that like you never appreciate anything. You lose everything.
It's like when Little Miss dies and he goes, oh, will everyone else like disappear? And he goes, oh, that can't do. Or
and it goes both ways, because his reaction, and in other forms of art, it's been like, okay, great, I'm not going to get attached to anything because I'm going to lose everything. It's like, well, that's no way to live, and you can't live in a world where you're constantly losing things. So, you know, the moral of the story is that the beauty of life, the thing that makes us human, is our mortality. The fact is we're only on this rock for, unfortunately, probably not 200 years.
I don't know if it's just me, but like we obviously touched upon like why the movie wasn't quite as successful as, you know, people would hope for it to be. To me, like, I think there's some aspect of it touching upon like death and like come to an end. Like, I think that's might have been like a little bit as to why the movie wasn't quite as like well, because like people, especially nowadays, like people are quite like, they don't like talking about death. They see action movies where people get blown up, but like when it comes to actually like a deep, meaningful like movie about death,
I
nothing
totally
lasts forever.
I totally get what you mean, and I think as a kids movie blockbuster, it was impossible to market this as like a philosophical movie about the human condition. So they obviously didn't. And then maybe families were like, well, this is a little too deep for our kids. But basically,
no, go read some Marcus Aurelius and
if this movie was remade today, they would basically, I think they would tone down the kids version, the kids side of it. They wouldn't even try to appeal. Like, they would have the comedy, they would have the humor, but they would really like make it more serious, and then market it almost as an awards movie, because that's the type of movie where you expect
So
to
to
ask
make
yourself
it
questions about mortality, more serious.
to make it like more gut wrenching towards the end.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it is pretty gut wrenching, but I think they would just even it out, because, like, as we've discussed, that was the problem, is that it's too serious to be a pure kids movie, and it's still too silly to be like a pure grown-ups movie. And so that's why it's a flawed movie, but that's why it's unique, and that's why it's interesting. And yeah, you don't have to have a Oscar-worthy movie to think seriously about these questions. Sometimes, we can think about it in the most unlikely of places, and that happens to be a hidden gem 1999 Robin Williams movie, which teaches us everything about humanity.
Do you think it's a sort of movie where, like, in 5 to 10 years' time, it would be a good, like, contender for, like, a remake or redo?
I think
Because
because it didn't do well,
yeah.
and the material that it's based on, it's not like it's a Lord of the Rings or a Harry Potter. Like, even though those books existed and nerds know about Asimov and stuff like that, it's not, the source material isn't big enough that it's enough for it to be rebooted. So it wouldn't shock me if they did. I don't think this is where they would start, because you don't often reboot something that was actually a failure on the first try.
Yeah.
But it could be, especially with all the AI stuff.
Oh, definitely, yeah. But then again, like, it's one of those, I mean, to me, it's like one of those special Robin Williams sort of movies, and I think it's a bit, not disrespectful, but like, you sort of like, there's some movies you can just leave. And it's
I agree. I think if anyone, obviously this doesn't work for the studios, but like, if anyone wants, if you want a version of this movie to watch, just watch this movie.
Like I say, it's definitely a hidden gem, and like, I don't think as many people know about it as there should be.
I don't
like,
think
more people should watch.
And I think it's a sort of movie, if you showed that to like a 10-year-old now, they could enjoy it without seeing Robin Williams, and then you could be like, there's a lot more movies with him that exist, and it could be a good gateway movie to him.
And also, like, the mainstream Robin Williams audience are gonna like mainly be focused on like the hyperactive, like Mrs. Doubtfire, and like, it's just nice to be like, how about Bicentennial Man, a bit more of his like softer side.
Yeah, I mean, but Mrs. Doubtfire does have its serious messages about like family and stuff, but it is so. The Mrs. Doubtfire stuff is so out there.
I need to rewatch it, definitely. It's been a long time.
I mean, there's definitely some stuff that hasn't aged well with, like, from a trans and cross-dressing point of view, and sort of some of the implications about what that means. But that'll be for another podcast. So the final question on this would be, would you rank this? So for the movies that I picked that are among my favorite, I say where they rank in my top 100 of all time, and I'm over time building my top 100. This movie, as of now, I will not put in my top 100. Would you put this in your top 100? And if so, I mean, this isn't exact science, where would you, like, would it be top 10, top 50, 75? Like, where would you put it?
It sort of depends what hat I'm wearing. Like, if I'm wearing like a movie critic hat.
No, wear your Ums hat.
With my Ums hat, it's definitely top 100 for me.
Okay.
Maybe like within the top 20, lower teens, maybe.
Okay. But obviously a big part of it is because you saw this as a kid.
It's just I saw it at the right time, and it's just, for me, it's just something magical about it, which, like, I just really like. So
on that, Ums, I want to say thank you for coming on the pod. It's been super interesting talking to you. I think we've agreed on a lot, but it's been really interesting to hear how you experienced this movie as a kid, and I hope our audience has enjoyed it and they go ahead and watch or rewatch this movie.
Definitely watch Bicentennial Man, and one is glad to be of service.
Perfect ending.